For the first time ever, we're getting an inside look at the FBI's investigation into possible ties between Saudi Arabia and 9/11. A new report from ProPublica and the New York Times Magazine dives into the investigation. The article goes behind the scenes with many of the agents involved in the secret case. They spent years trying to figure out if one of America's closest allies was involved in the worst terror attack in U.S. history.
It is the first time anyone has written about Operation Encore, the FBI's campaign focusing on Saudi Arabia and 9/11. You will recall 15 of the 19 hijackers were from the kingdom, but Saudi Arabia has continued to deny any involvement in the attacks. ProPublica senior reporter Sebastian Rotella co-wrote that article, and he is joining us now from Washington. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So, Sebastian, in your article, you write Washington is still trying to keep possible Saudi connections to 9/11 a secret. And you spoke with former FBI agents about this. What'd you learn?
My colleague Tim Golden and I spent months working on this, and as you said, talking to agents involved in the investigation, officials who knew about it, some of the witnesses who had turned up. And what we learned was, as you said, although the U.S. government, the 9/11 Commission, and U.S. government agencies had officially, publicly cleared Saudi Arabia of connections of involvement in the 9/11 case, this small team of FBI investigators, mainly in California and New York, pursued it for years, pursued information that was already out there, questions that were already out there about several Saudi officials in California in particular who were suspected of having aided two of the al-Qaeda hijackers who were in California when they first arrived in the United States. And this team, working quietly and with minimal resources, found a series of witnesses, new witnesses. They went back to old evidence that hadn't been focused on before, and turned up new evidence. Circumstantial evidence largely, but that only added to the questions that were already out there about whether some of these low-level Saudi officials, a diplomat, cleric in Los Angeles, another individual who was believed to be a spy in San Diego, had been part of a support network that had aided these two hijackers in the months leading up to the attacks.
So you focus a lot of the article on this FBI agent, Daniel Gonzalez, and he's sort of like tireless in his effort to investigate whether or not there was a high-level Saudi connection to 9/11, even though his bosses are telling him to let it go, right? Telling him and his team to let it go. What were some of the biggest takeaways from your interviews with him? And I know he sort of, every time there was a document that was released, he would dive into it, and he became aware that there was one narrative that was being floated that wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't 100% the truth either.
That's correct. I mean, Danny Gonzalez was based in San Diego, and those two hijackers, Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, had been based there. And he had the reaction that, you know, this crime had been committed partly on his beat, and that from the beginning, when he had been working on this case, he had discovered a number of individuals, including people connected to the Saudi government, who appeared to have, who had clearly had contact with the hijackers, or believed to, and whom he suspected of knowing involvement, of supporting them. So he pursued that, again, joining forces with agents in New York in particular, who also, for understandable reasons, were really focused and obsessed with this. And not just in 2002, 2003, but really starting in 2007, they really bear down. And as you said, with some opposition from higher levels, at other times they had support, but it was certainly a narrative that people were uncomfortable with. Some of the senior officials we talked to said, look, there was smoke, but there wasn't fire. These guys found interesting stuff, but it just wasn't there to prosecute anyone or to pursue it further. Others felt that, you know, that if they had been allowed to pursue it more aggressively with more resources, perhaps they could have reached conclusions. But the fact is, there were clearly questions that suggest that some of these Saudi officials who were being looked at had not told the complete truth about their contacts with the hijackers, particularly a mystery of the first 2 weeks when the hijackers arrived in the United States in Los Angeles in the year 2000. Despite the intense work of the total forces of the FBI, there was a continuing mystery about those 2 weeks. Where had those two hijackers been? Why did they all of a sudden turn up in contact with us Saudi figure and moved to San Diego. And these agents found new witnesses who gave them evidence that suggested that this Saudi imam diplomat in Los Angeles had helped or directed people to house them in that period. So they were coming up with specifics, but being told, look, this is all very interesting, but, you know, in 2012, this is not something we're going to pursue as a prosecution. You just don't have enough.
So that begs the question, and I think a lot of people watching this and reading your reporting are going to wonder. We've seen this time and time again, most recently with the Jamal Khashoggi case. The United States' relationship with the kingdom is troubling for a lot of Americans. So the question becomes, why is the Bureau so secretive about their investigation? Is there any concern on their part? Are they worried about the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia, even as the Trump administration relies on the kingdom for a variety of things? The president of the United States is very close to the members of the royal family, and we are using them, obviously, for to keep up a maximum pressure campaign on Iran. But why is the FBI so secretive about this?
Well, it depends who you talk to. I think the serious senior FBI officials who have talked to us have told us, look, there just isn't that much there in this case. The secrecy is the more difficult issue. Why is something, if there really isn't that much there, why, as you say, why should it not be, given the dimensions of this crime, why should it not be all out there for people to decide for themselves? Look, I think our investigation shows that all through the 3 presidential administrations since 9/11, this has been an ongoing issue. Everything having to do with Saudi Arabia is always treated with great delicacy and deference for many reasons. Among them, some of the ones you cited, Saudi Arabia's wealth, its oil, its geopolitical strategic influence, and of course, most importantly, I think what people at the Bureau and the CIA have always told us is that their need for Saudi Arabia as a counterterrorism partner. So for whatever reason, through these 3 administrations, questions that could be problematic or embarrassing for the kingdom have been handled with delicacy and restraint and secrecy, and that continues today.
So meantime, there's a group of 9/11 families that have continued to fight for justice in the court system, continued to ask the various administrations to release documents. And funnily enough, you know, it was President Trump, you write in the article, that said, yeah, sure, we can release some of these documents that the previous administrations had said no to, only to sort of have their requests kind of shut down by the Justice Department. But where are their efforts going now? What's going on with their desire to sue the Saudi government?
Well, there's this massive lawsuit being pursued in New York by the 9/11 families, and it's reached a point where they're approaching the deposition phase. Interestingly enough, a lot of the information that was developed by Operation Encore, whether or not you think it's significant evidence, but what was developed is kind of at the heart of this lawsuit, and that's what this big battle in court is going on about. The judge will have to rule soon about the government's resistance to making public some of these documents, and that will really drive and shape this lawsuit, which is really focused on that question of, did Saudi officials aid those 2 hijackers in California? And in the coming months, there will be some rulings that will determine whether the Trump administration has to disclose more documents, and there will also be rulings about the scope and the number of people who will be deposed in Saudi Arabia, and whether perhaps some of this information that these agents pursued for so many years until the case is still technically open, but until 2016 it was really aggressive and active, whether that will finally come out in the setting of this civil suit against Saudi Arabia.
You know, Sebastian, Anne-Marie pointed out the 9/11 families, and one can only imagine the pain and suffering that they've had to live with over the course of these many years. And when you read in your reporting that potential leads went sort of cold, you point specifically to an individual named Omar al-Bayoumi. He's a well-connected Saudi student, and there is perhaps some evidence that he may have been aware of the plot prior to 9/11?
Well, he's someone whose role was known publicly in the sense that there's no question that he meets with after that 2-week mystery period I told you about when the hijackers first arrive in Los Angeles, he meets with them at a restaurant in Los Angeles. He says it is an accidental meeting. A lot of people believe that's not true because there's great suspicion that he was a Saudi intelligence operative. And they move 3 days later to San Diego, where he's from, and he helps set them up in an apartment in his apartment complex and helps them open a bank account and gets people in the immigrant community to assist them as translators and things like that. So there's great suspicion about him. Yes, he's one of the key figures, and there's a sense that that could have been investigated more aggressively early on. The Encore team did pursue a lot of information about him. They did not come up with a smoking gun, I have to make that clear, but they feel that the evidence they found only heightens the questions about him, about the fact of why was this Saudi intelligence official in contact with these guys? Was he part of a support network? They found evidence that suggests that there could have been meetings and travel that he was involved in preparing for the hijackers' arrival. And they found a document or a piece of paper in possessions that had been confiscated from him in 2001 from his property. He was living in England at the time, just after the attacks, that showed a diagram for a flight formula, not unlike the descent that Flight 77 made when it hit the Pentagon, which those two hijackers that he had known had been on. So again, without going too far, without overstating the evidence, there was a feeling that if that had been found earlier, perhaps he would have been pursued more aggressively. But that is one of the lingering mysteries about this case.
And you know, we got about 15 seconds, Sebastian, but just give our audience the coda to this. Where is this investigation now? It apparently ended in 2016, right?
Well, it was transferred to a different unit, but I think between retirements, transfers, there was clearly a concerted effort, we're told, to sort of scale this case down. And senior officials at the FBI and prosecutors felt it just wasn't there, that this had gone on far enough, and so the case was moved. It remains open, technically, but our impression, and no one has contradicted it, is that it is not active. So as far as an investigation right now, we don't have the sense that there is any movement. I think the main arena for new revelations about this, whether they show once and for all that there wasn't much there, or they show that there could be something to pursue, will be in the civil case.
All right. Well, I encourage people to check out the article on ProPublica's website. It's in-depth and really good. Sebastian Rotella, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.